Welcome to the Voice Global session, creating a Darth Vader voice in Amazon Polly using SSML. I'm Doug Schumacher, creative director, writer, and also creator of the podcast Homie and Lexy. Now, before we get started, I just want to mention that if you can set up an AWS account and follow through on this, I'm going to be using their text-to-speech engine, Polly. So this will enable you to follow along and literally paste in the code as I'm going through. There's also a little free souvenir MP3 you can download at the end in Polly. So one other thing I want to mention is why are we doing this? Well, it's certainly not because there are so many clients out there that are itching to have a Darth Vader voice as their brand personality. Rather, this is more of an exercise in control and how to adjust a voice relative to maybe a certain desired brand personality using SSML. Brand strategies represent the company's most persuasive way to communicate with customers. This is based on a lot of research they've done. They put a lot of money into that. So the point here is really to try and help us use SSML to push our synthetic speech a little bit closer to what the ideal brand voice would be. Another reason for using something as extreme as Darth Vader is that extreme examples help illustrate the effects. They magnify what we're doing, and so it makes it a little bit easier to understand how different changes that we're doing will affect the voice. So what we're going to go through the agenda, we'll start with a look at the Wiggins personality model, and then we'll look at the three of the major parameters or factors for controlling the voice personality, which are timbre, prosody, and language. And as I promised, a free souvenir at the end. So let's start with the Wiggins personality model. Jerry Wiggins was an American psychologist. This model has been around for a while. And it was really applied to voice by a communications professor at Stanford named Clifford Nass, who was well known for a lot of the research that he did on human-computer interactions. And he was the one who really came out and applied this model to a lot of voice tests. He has a book called Wired for Speech, in which he does about 20 different tests on how different parameters, like we're going to be going through, affect personality. So this is very much based on a lot of the research that he did. Now, one of the things he's most well known for is a very interesting concept called the media equation theory. This is Clifford Nass. And what the media equation theory states is that people tend to treat computers and other media as if they were real people. So, in other words, if a product's voice is annoying or boring to the user, then the user is going to project that personality trait onto the product or the environment that they're hearing that. Now, the voice, the reaction to that might be, well, I'm just going to avoid any personality at all. Well, you can't really do that. And that's another thing that Nass is very clear about is the idea that you cannot not communicate, because within seconds of hearing a voice, we start to assign all kinds of personality traits to it. I'm sure you can relate to this if you've listened to a podcast or even having a conversation with somebody on the other end of a phone. It doesn't take long before you start having an idea of who that person is, or at least what you think they are. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Wiggins personality model. You can see here that it's got two axes, one for affiliation and one for control. And at the ends of those axes, for the affiliation one is distant versus friendly. And then for the control one, dominance versus submissive. And we'll be plotting our brand on this to see how it might compare to other brands. You can use this for things like competitive analysis too, to see how your brand might stack up to competitors' voices. Now, this doesn't capture absolutely everything. It's not airtight. Humor is a good example. But it is a framework for comparing voices. And I mentioned competitive analysis, or even just a discussion. Things like brand personality, brand strategies, things like that, they can be pretty abstract, at least if you're not familiar with working with them. And so I think what this does more than anything is while you're trying to position a voice for a target personality, this gives you a visual map, if you will, of what moving in one direction or another might look like. And so keep that in mind, as it's really about and giving some context to what we're doing here. And in the name of context, let's look at the next slide. When NASA is writing about this in Wired for Speech, he's talking. He mentions some popular characters. In this case, Darth Vader is in there, and he mentioned Darth Vader as well, and how they would plot on here. So this gives you a little understanding of how what I was talking about earlier in terms of what's the comparative difference between some of the different personalities out there. So let's start to talk about the voice personality parameters. We're going to look at 3 primary ways of controlling those, or groupings of those parameters: timbre, prosody, and language. So let's go through those. We'll start with timbre. Timbre is the resonance of the voice, and typically what it communicates is things like gender, age, the size of the person, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick the Darth Vader voice, and we're going to go through Polly picking different personality parameters or different SSML parameters that are going to hopefully get us closer to the line the voice that we're targeting. So let's first start with listening to the line. What we're going to use is a line of Darth Vader's from The Empire Strikes Back. This is a line where he's on the spaceship, or it's on their spaceship, and he's basically firing the admiral and handing over the reins to his assistant. And so let's listen to that line now.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
And it's a pretty good line. You have failed me for the last time, Admiral. And then he kills him with the Force, and then hands the keys to the spaceship over to Pruitt. So pretty tough way for Pruitt to get his first day on the job, I guess. So let's go ahead. So that's our target. That's what we're going to be shooting for. Let's go into Amazon Polly now, and we're going to go through the console. We're not going to use the command line interface or anything like that. We're going to use the console for this. And so if you open up Polly, you will see the console, and we can type in our text into the plain text. We're going to start with the plain text version, and I think a lot of times in voice apps, people will, or companies will, go with the default voice, and so not necessarily try to carve out a certain brand personality. And so we're going to do the same. We're just going to start this with the default Polly settings, not tweak anything, and just see where that nets us. So let's take a listen now to what those default voice settings sound like. You'll notice it says Joanna female, so this could be interesting. And what I'm doing here to play this is just hitting the listen to speech button over on the right. So let's go ahead and listen to what the default read for that line would be.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
And so listening to that sends me scurrying back to Polly quickly to make some adjustments there. So the first and obvious thing, I think, is probably the female voice. We know from Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father that he's probably a male, so we're going to assign him a male voice. Now, there's a lot of voices in Polly. Many different languages are represented. I don't think Darth Vader was American, but somehow mysteriously ended up with an American accent. So we're going to look in the Polly voices for an American accent with a male voice. And in that category, Polly gives us 3 voices: Matthew, Justin, and Joey. And so what we're going to do now is just shift our voice selection over from Joanna, the female, to Matthew, Justin, and Joey, and listen to how those sound. So first, let's listen to voice number 1, Matthew.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
And now voice number 2, Justin.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
And lastly, the Polly voice, Joey.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
So, for my money, it's on Matthew. To me, that one's pretty far and away the one to go with here. When I think of Darth Vader and I think of the dominance and the sort of gravitas of that character, Matthew is the voice to me that of all of those, far and away is the most like what I would expect, what I think we need to start with for getting to Darth Vader. Now keep in mind we've got a lot of work to do going forward, but this is at least selecting the foundational voice that we can start applying SSML changes to. So and that's the gender and size. So with that, we're in the timber section. We're going to move on to, sorry, I said gender and age. Size, we're going to move on to size. And the way that we control size is through something called vocal tract length. And you can think of this in terms of vocal cord length. And typically larger people will have larger vocal cords, at least the length. And so that's associated with larger size. And so what we're going to want to do here is to increase the length or the size of the vocal tract length in Amazon Polly. This is one of Amazon Polly's effects, and so we're going to need to use SSML for this. So we're going to move into the SSML portion of today's program. If you look on your screen up by right where it says plain text above the line, you'll see where it says SSML. There's a tab for SSML. Click on that, and what you'll see is it should bring in the tags around the voice that we were just using, or around the sentence that we were just using, the Admiral sentence. And you can see the speak tags. And speak is the highest level tag in Amazon, or in SSML rather. And if you're familiar with HTML, some of this is probably going to look a little bit familiar. And the speak tags go in the outermost portions of your text. So it's the beginning and the very last tag of the SSML. So let's take a look. Here's this. What we're going to do is we're going to expand the vocal tract length. So here's what that SSML text or SSML code will look like that we're going to use. I'm going to go with 15% increase in size. I think that's a pretty sizable amount, but let's do a little exercise. I'll play some different vocal tract length sizes, starting with negative 25%. We'll move our way up to positive 15%, and you can listen to how those will affect the sound.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral. You have failed me for the last time, Admiral. You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
And so there again, I think, for what we're doing, the 15% certainly puts us in the right direction. So that's our timbre section. Let's move on to the prosody section. Prosody is the rhythm and flow of speech. You can see the different levers we have here to pull on in prosody of rate, pitch, volume, and range. Let's go through each of those. As far as rate, we'll start with rate. Speaking rate, fast versus slow. It's obviously a pretty noticeable personality or noticeable trait about the way somebody speaks. And here again, I want to listen to the Darth Vader line where he speaks Admiral. Let's listen to that line again, and listen to the pace at which he speaks, and then we'll play back our first Matthew read. Okay, and I'm going to listen to both of those. We'll listen to both of those and compare the two. Let's listen.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
So you probably noticed pretty clearly that the Darth Vader line is considerably slower. He's very drawn out. He really milks it for everything he can. So what we're going to do is, as you can see here on the card, we're going to increase the prosody rate by about 25, or decrease it rather by about 25% to slow it down, and that's a pretty significant amount. Here again, we're dealing with a rather extreme character, so we're going to have numbers like that. So let's take that to down 25%, and let's listen to how that sounds.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
And that's better, right? Still some work to do here, but that certainly sounds more in line with what we've been hearing on the Darth Vader read. Next up is pitch, and if there is a character that is known for a low voice, it's probably Darth Vader, and so pitch is going to give us the opportunity to modify our voice pitch. And this tag is added in with this. We're still in prosody here, so we're going to add the pitch tag into the prosody line here, and I'm going to push the pitch even further. I'm going to push it down 30%, pretty extreme range, but again, extreme characters. So let's listen to how that sounds.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
Okay, and it's a little bit better, right? A little bit more of that deep rumble that Darth Vader has. The next prosody parameter is volume. Now, volume is interesting. Volume, just in my own use, I tend to use it more for accentuating certain words, and that really ties in with our fourth prosody parameter, which is range. And range isn't so much a poly setting as it is just something you can do with poly to add more fluctuation in the voice and make it sound less monotone. And you can, some characters are going to sound more monotone than others. And in fact, if Darth Vader, being in that upper left corner, he would tend to speak a little bit more monotone. But in this case, we're going to use volume and range to add emphasis on certain words. So let's again listen to the Darth Vader speech line, and I want to focus on two words in particular. I want to focus on failed and last. Listen to how he really puts an interesting twist on those.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
Pretty interesting. It definitely adds a lot of personality and a lot of he's really getting across his sort of just his being fed up with the Admiral, and his resolution to take action and fix the situation, or what he perceives as a bad situation. So let's look at our code. Here is our prosody code with volume, rate, and pitch, all focused on couple of different words, failed and last. And I'm also going to draw time out a little bit because he added a nice little accent on that as well by drawing that word out. So you can see here, for example, with failed, prosody rate, we're going to take it down another 15%. The pitch, I'm going to go up 23% because he does you have failed me. He does go up on that. And then for the volume, I'm just going to push it up a little bit for failed and for last, just to make that stand out. So let's listen to how how this sounds with our more complex SSML code here. And that's again moving in the right direction. Now let's go back. Let's go back and listen to the original Darth Vader, and then we will listen to the first pass that we had, the default one, and then let's listen to where we are now. Okay.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
So listening to that, I would say that our SSML has definitely helped us move closer to our brand ideal. There's a big caveat I want to add to this, which is that if you've followed any of the research on voices, you probably come across the research that says that people generally prefer human recorded voices to synthetic ones, and I couldn't agree more. You're going to get a warmth, you're going to get a projection, you're going to get a certain delivery that you just synthetic speech doesn't come anywhere close right now. But at the same time, there are a lot of places in voice apps where you really can't practically use a human recording in all of the text instances. Think about something like a weather app, right? I mean, it just wouldn't be practical, and there'd be a lot of technological load on having it have to reference the MP3s constantly. So really, at the end of the day, we're going to have a lot of situations where we're going to have to use synthetic text, and yet at the same time, brands are still going to want to try to nail their brand voice as much as possible, at least to a certain degree. It doesn't have to be perfect, but at least move it in a certain direction. And so that's where I think SSML can still help us with getting closer to a certain personality. I want to show you a slide here this is, I've mentioned Clifford Nass in his book Wired for Speech a number of times, and the numerous research studies that he did in his lab. This is the summarizing results of some of the work that he did. And you'll just notice that in terms of the prosody parameters that we've just gone through, this gives you a guide on how tweaking those will affect your brand personality and the voice. If you think about where we were with Darth Vader in that upper left, if you look at what happens when you increase rate, pitch, or range, it actually moves you away from that character. Now, with range, that's more of like the overall range, but not necessarily adding emphasis to one or two words, which we did. But you can see here as a general rule how changing different prosody elements can affect the brand personality that we're going to end up with. The last factor on voice personality is language. In this section, we'll look at two factors: vocabulary, or the words that you choose to use, and syntax, which is how you string those words together. Now, I'm going to hedge that language is even more impacting on the brand voice personality than either of the other two, timbre or prosody. And if you think about it, think about the intelligent people, the most intelligent people in the world. They certainly don't all speak with the same timbre or the same prosody, and they don't necessarily use the same language, but there is a certain language code that they use, which conveys a certain intelligence and wisdom that they might have. And so this is the area that really, if you really want to focus on nailing exactly what our voice brand personality is, this is the one that you're going to put the most effort on. It's not a Amazon Polly technology, it's a human technology called writing. And so this is really where you're going to have the biggest impact. As a lighthearted illustration of that, let me play a clip from, let's use our same Darth Vader voice that we've been using, but let's have him speak to the Admiral in maybe a different manner. Let's listen to that.
Listen, dude. I hate to be a downer and all, but your shit's not tight and I gotta scratch you from the lineup. Oh, I'm gonna have to smoke your ass too.
And so, yeah, I don't know who that guy was, but I don't think it was Darth Vader. So anyway, keep that in mind. Writing is your biggest ticket to nailing of brand personality. I mentioned a free souvenir at the top of the show. We're going to now get that. If you've been following along in Polly with the SSML, you should have some SSML code in your system and in the console. And if you just go over to the lower right and you click on Download MP3, you should end up with a free souvenir of the track that you just made. You can also play around with all kinds of various lines that Darth Vader might speak, showing all kinds of juxtapositions with the voice tone and the lines that he delivers. That wraps up our session on creating a Darth Vader voice using Amazon Polly. I'm Doug Schumacher. I want to thank you very much for joining this presentation. I would love to pick up the conversation with you. You feel free to reach out to me any way, however you'd like. I'm on Twitter, is probably the easiest, at Meme Runner. And thank you again for dropping in. I appreciate you viewing the presentation, and may the Force be with you.